Hi, this is Mike Fry from No Kill Learning, and this is No Kill in Motion, a monthly podcast with updates from the growing no-kill movement. Today, for an in-depth interview, I'm being joined by Aubrie Cavanaugh. She's an author, no-kill advocate, and founder of No Kill Huntsville. Her efforts have caused her hometown of Huntsville, Alabama, to be the safest place for homeless animals in her home state, and even that region of the country. Her new book, Not Rocket Science, a story of no-kill animal shelter advocacy in Huntsville, Alabama, is available and priced simply to cover the costs from Amazon.com. That ensures it reaches the broadest possible audience. It's getting rave reviews from animal advocates across the country and beyond. I recently talked with Aubrie about her book, her advocacy, and the no-kill movement. You aren't going to want to miss a minute of this, so stick with me. Hi, this is Mike Fry from No Kill Learning, and this is No Kill in Motion, your monthly podcast about the goings-on in the no-kill movement. Today I'm being joined by Aubrie Cavanaugh, all-around big brain thinker, advocate, and author. Her book is Not Rocket Science, a story of animal shelter advocacy in Huntsville, Alabama. It's getting rave reviews from all around, and it's helping advocates across the United States and beyond to begin reforming their animal shelters. I'm thrilled to have her here for the interview. Welcome, Aubrie. Can we get started by having you explain a little bit about how you got started in animal advocacy? And, then we'll get into talking more about your book.
Sure. And I cover this in the book because the book is part my story, but then it's also part the story of our advocacy in Huntsville, Alabama. I was raised in an animal-friendly household. Animals were just part of our lives growing up. And in 2006, we had to have our geriatric dog, Snake, euthanized. And if you look behind me, there's a photo of her on the wall in her prime. She was part coyote, part German Shepherd. She looked like a German Shepherd in just a compact, athletic body. But she had become, she had mobility issues. And when she developed cognitive issues, in addition to all her other physical issues with digestion and all this, we just decided it was time to make what people call that terrible decision. And we decided to have her euthanized on Earth Day of 2006. And we knew it was coming. We knew it had been coming for a long time, but I wasn't really coping well afterwards. So as a way to try to turn my grief into something more positive by channeling it, I started donating to the local animal shelter, thinking, well, maybe I can do something to help dogs like her. Help them have a better time at the shelter. And that went on for a period of months until one day I was on the animal shelter's website and I saw a video that had been produced by the city. And I started watching it. And I think my mindset was, well, if it's a good video, I'll share it with people because I wanted to encourage others to do something similar, to maybe make donations themselves of things the shelter didn't budget for, maybe adopt, foster, volunteer. And the video went on for about 10 minutes, kind of long, but it was fairly informative. But then the tone changed to the video, and I could hear a track in the background. A woman was speaking, saying that they did their best to save the animals, but they couldn't save all of them. And it showed footage of a beagle being taken from a kennel, walked on a leash by a kennel worker to a room, and the dog looked happy, and by all the outward appearances was a healthy dog. And the footage changed to him being put on a table in a room. And then I quickly realized that what was happening was that they had recorded video of a dog that they were going to destroy. And I just couldn't turn the video off quickly enough. I mean, my face turned red, my ears started to feel hot. My heart rate went up, and I just was kind of fumbling with my mouse to turn this thing off. And I just was shocked that they would record that. And prior to that time, I think that, like many people, I felt that all the animals in the shelter that were healthy and treatable got a chance to be adopted out. And The next day, I emailed the shelter to just tell them that I thought the video was offensive. I thought that there were issues with it having on their website where a child might run across it. I mean, I knew what my reaction had been. And I asked if the dog in the video had been destroyed. And the response I got was pretty short and pretty direct, and it was, "Nobody wants beagles these days." And those 5 words became permanently etched into my brain. I was just shocked with the callousness with which those words were stated, as if we were talking about maybe an old couch or a broken lamp. And it just, I was upset, and then I got angry, and then I channeled my anger, kind of like I had channeled my grief. And I decided to start educating myself on what was happening, not only at my local shelter, but at shelters across the country. And that really was when the path of my life changed in big regard. And I became what I now call a no-kill advocate. And I'm an advocate, outspoken advocate against shelter killing of healthy and treatable animals in our nation's animal shelters.
The chapter in your book, it's titled 5 words, and those 5 words are "no one wants beagles these days." That chapter just hit me like a ton of bricks, actually, the way it's written in the book. Very well done, by the way. Can you fast forward a little bit? I mean, clearly you've got a shelter director who said nobody wants beagles these days. Of course, that wasn't true. There were, as the book clearly explains, there were a lot of things that were believed in the shelter in those early days that turned out to not be true. They were the excuses for why they were killing. Can you explain a little bit what you learned as you kind of peeled the onion about what was going on at your shelter? Like, what was the kill rate? What were the excuses? What was the culture like at the shelter?
Sure. At that time, and keeping in mind this was back in 2006, and I don't have the statistics for that time period that I have documented. I remember asking about them and finding out what they were. The what we call the live release rate, which are the percentage of animals that leave the building alive, as the name would imply, was probably about 25%. And initially, I was just kind of floored by it, but I thought, you know what, I need to educate myself, because my thought is that an informed advocate, an educated advocate, is a more effective advocate. So I spent a long period of time just trying to figure out why this was happening, because I really, prior to that point, whether I should have known or not, I didn't know that was happening just a few miles from where I work. I had this presumption, I think like most of the public does, that all shelters, that they do everything they can to keep animals alive. And I learned out that wasn't the case, that there is this calcified, outdated mindset in most animal shelters in America of what we call a catch and kill method, or a first in, first out method, which is, once animals have been there for a certain amount of time, they just get destroyed. And it doesn't matter if they're healthy or treatable. It doesn't matter if they're suffering. They use the word euthanasia very haphazardly and compare it to the process of what we did to our dog, which was euthanasia. What I saw happen to that beagle, not euthanasia. I mean, it's not euthanasia when you take a healthy animal and destroy them. So I did spend quite a bit of time educating myself. And luckily for me, in terms of timing, in 2007, Nathan Winograd published his groundbreaking book, which really was a game changer for me. It's called Redemption: The Myth of Pet Overpopulation and the No-Kill Revolution in America. And the things that I read in that book just really further added to my education. And once I felt like I was armed with enough information, I actually wrote to the newly elected mayor of the city of Huntsville, Tommy Battle, and I sent him a copy of Redemption, and I said, I think we're better than this. And that kind of started a conversation with the city, which ultimately took many, many years. But that was the beginning, at least for me, of advocacy in Huntsville, Alabama.
In order to get from where things were then, when you first had the awareness that there was all this needless killing happening at the shelter, to where you are now, which is a much better place. I mean, as I recall, the data shows that, Huntsville Animal Services has now had a live release rate above 90% for, multiples of years, and
Yes.
continues to make improvements. Along the way, that was a bumpy road, and there was a lot of resistance. Can you describe a couple of highlights and lowlights in that journey along the way? Some of the surprises.
And I'm going to start just briefly by explaining that my first thing was, like I said, I wrote a letter to Tommy Battle, and I said, you know what, we're better than this. I mean, we're a very progressive city. We have a large military installation. We support the space program. We have a lot of high-tech industry. We're considered a medical hub. People come to our area for specialized medical care. So I wrote to him, and he actually asked to meet with me, which I didn't really expect, but we had a meeting. It was himself, the then city administrator, the shelter director, And the shelter director said that she thought that they were doing a great job. And I did my best to be respectful and diplomatic about it, and just say that I didn't agree, that I thought that many more things could be done using something called the no-kill equation, which is set forth in Winograd's book. And I offered the mayor, I said, tell you what, we've got a no-kill conference coming up in Washington, D.C. If you'll get her there, I'll pay for her to go. And my thought was that the shelter director was immersed in a group of people that were using all these progressive ideas, that she could then bring those ideas back to the city and things would change. And she went to the conference, came back, and honestly, not a whole lot changed for a period of years. The city did implement a low-cost spay and neuter program called Fix in Alabama, which has proven to be very successful in reducing the intake of the number of animals in the shelter. But other than that, the progress was just so slow. I think the live release rate went from 24%, maybe then to 30, 32, 34. It was moving way too slowly. And I felt that, being an army of one wasn't working, so maybe the best way to do this is to be one of many. And I decided to form No Kill Huntsville, which is a coalition of like-minded individuals in the community. Most of these folks run their own nonprofits. They're running their own shelters, their own rescue groups. One is an author of children's books. And we decided to band together to speak with one voice. And our intent was to approach the city to just offer them help as a group. And that didn't work out, because at one point in 2013, we offered the shelter director an opportunity to meet with a subject matter expert to have hands-on help in the shelter to help her. And that offer was declined. It was refused, but I keep using the word declined because there's two sides to every story. Nonetheless, though, the help would have been free. We would have paid for it as our group. And when that offer of free help was declined, that told us that things were going to be a whole lot tougher than we had hoped for. Had the offer of free help been accepted, again, it wouldn't have cost the city anything. Much of the advocacy of our group really would not have been necessary at all. But because the city said no, and the shelter director said, hey, I'm doing a beautiful job, we're doing great things, and this is at a time where 3 out of every 4 animals were being killed, we decided we had to take our issue to the public, and the work of No Kill Huntsville began in earnest. And
it's so funny, and one of the things that I think comes out so clearly when I read the book is that the city very much likes to, and it's common in communities all over the United States, when advocates step up and say, oh, we want the killing in our animal shelter to stop, the advocates get labeled as being mean or divisive, but in fact all of the fighting that happened in Huntsville, it seems to me, happened because the city was resistant to even the simplest and most basic changes. It's like they put up this wall of defense that it was really shocking in a lot of different ways. Can you talk a little about that?
And I think I think I refer to the wall in my book, because I think that after we formed No Kill Huntsville, and we had a group of a fairly large number of people that we had to narrow down over a period of time. A lot of people, there's this phrase that says 80% talk, 20% do. Well, it turned out to be lower than 20%. We ended up with a core group of people that were on the same page, that were willing to speak out and take the risks associated with that, meaning lost relationships, lost friendships, being labeled the enemy or being labeled the problem, as people focused on the messengers and not the fact that the message was necessary in the first place. But I think that we did a lot of research. We looked at the no-kill equation, and we networked with people across the country to figure out, okay, what are you doing in terms of your foster programs? What are you doing in terms of proactive redemptions, which is another way of saying return to owner programs, getting animals back home? So we did a lot of research to figure out what other places were doing. And I think that we really thought that by having our research ready and having ideas of what the city could be doing differently, and then offering the city free help, that logically one would think that free help would be accepted. It's not like the city was going to have to pay for it. We were going to pay for that. So that was our olive branch to say, here, we know things can be different. We're just trying to help. And I think that we allowed ourselves to believe that offer of free help would be accepted. And when it was not, again, it was like, two paths through the woods. And when we hit that wall, well, we had two choices. We either could take the matter to the public and get the public involved, or we could stop. And we knew we couldn't stop. That is one thing about advocacy. Once you start, you got to be all in. You have to be committed to the process. But had the city accepted that free help and treated us not as enemies, but as supporters at the very beginning, our path would have been completely different.
What, it's such a fascinating topic, but we don't have a whole lot of time. What do you think? And people honestly should just read the book. They'll get all of the information they need just by reading the book. What do you think are a handful of the most important lessons people can learn from the Huntsville no-kill story?
Well, I have a chapter toward the end called our advice to others and lessons learned. And since I stumbled just now, let me explain one thing. The book is part my story, part our story. I published the book by myself on purpose. I mean, I'm one of 6 people in a coalition, but there are sometimes legal issues involved with the exercise of free speech. So I published the book on my own on behalf of our group, so that the others in the group were not being exposed to any type of liability. I actually had to acquire extra insurance before publishing the book, because since I work in the legal field, I know that the ability to defend a lawsuit has nothing at all to do with the ability to prevent a lawsuit. So,
well, and for those who haven't read the book, there's some interesting details in the book about the struggle with the city that are disclosed in the book that are the kind of things that you're talking about. I won't give them away because people should read the book.
Well, right. I do cover the opposition in a great detail, because I think that knowing the no-kill equation is great. I mean, to me, it's the DIY. It's the way to end shelter killing of healthy and treatable pets. But having said that, just knowing about the equation isn't enough. You need to know what the opposition is going to be, because you have to be prepared for a fight and a struggle. And getting us back onto the part about lessons learned and our advice for others. And again, it's a whole chapter, but it's things like figure out what you want. I mean, I think there are a lot of times that there are people that don't like what's happening at their local animal shelter once they learn about it, but they're not clear on what they want. It's not enough to go to a municipality running a tax-funded animal shelter and say, stop destroying healthy and treatable animals. We don't like it. Because each city or county that's running a shelter like that, I mean, the status quo is what they want. I mean, for them, it's working. Otherwise, they would have changed it on their own. I mean, if they had any plan on being proactive about it, that would have happened already without the necessity of free speech by the public. So figure out what you want. And in our case, it was simple. We wanted the city of Huntsville to stop destroying healthy and treatable animals in the shelter using tax dollars. Beyond figuring out what you want, you need to have a core group of people that are willing to speak. I think that if there's one person in a community that's willing to speak out, that's great. But I learned from my early days, it's very easy for you to be labeled as zealot or to be labeled as naive or uninformed. I mean, I heard many times that I couldn't possibly appreciate or understand the challenges faced by the city and how difficult it was to keep animals alive. Well, fast forward now, 8 years on, the live release rate has been above 90% for about 5 years. So in fact, it was possible all along. It's just that
what's so actually funny about it as well, they were trying to label you as being uninformed. In the end, 8 years later, the things they ended up doing to achieve the live release rate that they've achieved were the things that you were recommending all along. So in reality, the people who were not informed were the so-called experts at the city.
I would agree.
They didn't know. They didn't understand. They were stuck in an old paradigm that just wasn't working. And
and I think it's common for municipalities they don't want to show weakness, and they want to be able to say, "Oh, we're already doing it the best way it can be done." Well, clearly that's not the case. And again, it's that initial defensiveness. It just really kind of set the stage. And even to this day, even though the city has made tremendous progress, there is still more work to be done. But even to this day, there's a degree, even when we try to take the high road and be incredibly diplomatic, which we always focused on being, we were very careful about word choice in every meeting we had, every letter we wrote. We are still labeled to a degree within the community for having had the audacity to be outspoken. But I think I speak for everyone in the group that if someone had told us in January of 2012, when we got together, if someone had told us, okay, in a few years, the live release rate will be above 90% and it's going to stay that way, but there's a price to be paid and you're going to be labeled, you're going to be ridiculed, you're going to be terrible things will be said about you in social media and in the public. It will damage your reputation. I think we still all would have signed up for that because unlike city officials who I think were more focused on people and maybe hurt feelings or personalities, our goal, we were always focused on saving the lives of animals. And if there was a price to be paid for that, so be it. And you had said something before about the opposition we faced. It was really incredible. And, at the time it was happening, it was really upsetting. But I think looking back, it's almost kind of sadly comical because some of the things that our opponents said and did were just so incredibly juvenile. And some of our greatest resistance came from within the rescue community, who are people that you would think would be completely on board with the concept of keeping healthy and treatable animals alive. But through cognitive dissonance, they were defending the killing of animals in the shelter and labeling us the problem, which, of course, now we know was not the case. The problem is the manner in which the shelter was being operated. We're incredibly pleased with the progress made. Still work to be done. But yeah. I think that but for us being outspoken on behalf of the community, I think that was super slow, incremental progress, maybe a couple percentage points every year, would have continued, and thousands of animals would have continued to pay with their lives.
Yeah, absolutely. Thousands of animals are being saved every year because of the advocacy work that you've done. It's a fascinating story. I thank you so much for your work. The book, again, is Not Rocket Science, A Story of No-Kill Animal Shelter Advocacy in Huntsville, Alabama. My guest again has been Aubrie Cavanaugh, founder of No Kill Huntsville, big brain thinker and author. Thank you so much. I, by the way, have a theory I want to just close with. I think the reaction that you saw from the city in Huntsville and why that type of reaction has been so universal is I believe people have this natural fear of being wrong, and it's even that the fear and the shame associated with being wrong is even more so when they're wrong about something as emotionally sensitive as killing healthy and treatable animals en masse. And so to a certain degree, the response is understandable, but I would argue to animal shelters out there, if you want to stop being ashamed of the work that you're doing, get on board. Shelter directors, read this book. You can learn from it too. Until next month, this is Mike Fry from No Kill Learning, and this has been No Kill in Motion. Thanks for watching.